Why don't we just say a few words about Pronto?
Pronto is a cable movie I made for Showtime. It was important to me because the author of the novel on which it's based is Elmore Leonard, who was a longtime friend of mine, and I shot it in Greece and adored that experience. And also an actor who had worked with me several times in the past starred in it, Peter Falk, and he was lovely. And Greece was great, Pronto was fine, and what was the third one you mentioned here?
Well, and then Rated X.
Rated X was
about the Mitchell brothers.
Is about the Mitchell brothers, the pornographers out of the Bay Area who owned the theater, the most successful pornographic movie theater in the country, I guess. They owned a few, and they also made films. They made Deep Throat, among others, and the biography of the relationship between those two brothers is fascinating, and we made a film out of it. Started at HBO, moved over to Showtime, and in order to get it on camera, we had to deliver both stars, and we wound up with Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez. But in order to get Emilio, we had to agree to his directing it as well. So it became a Sheen-Estevez family affair. It was a good film, but not as good as it had been before outside elements took over. But it was worthy. It was worthy. And of course, you know, the latitude that cable
gets produced, in fact.
Yeah,
are there any significant projects you put time, heart in that never saw the light of day?
The most frustrating single experience I had was on a Norman Mailer project having to do with his wonderful, to me, wonderful novel, Deer Park. I had sold it to Bob Markell at CBS as a 4-hour miniseries. And I was at Lorimar, I believe, at the time. Stonehenge was housed at Lorimar, if I'm not mistaken. And we were about to go to script when we got a call from the legal department at CBS announcing that Mr. Mailer announced that we no longer had the rights. And that took me aback because it was not an easy sale to make in the first place. And we couldn't get in touch with Mailer directly, but we did reach his then agent, Scott Meredith. And Meredith conveyed to us that we had failed to pick up the option. I think the check came in a week late or whatever the hell it was. And we could no longer have at it. And I told Mr. Meredith when I got to him that was unfortunate because, and I contrived this, that we already had part of the script. And he said, well, then in that case, why don't you send what you do have and we'll let you know whether or not Mr. Mailer will make it re-available. At which point I went home with the book and my yellow pad and did the first 2-hour script. It took me the better part of a month. And I thought it was good enough to give to Bob Markell at CBS because he knew what was going on here. And he approved of it, and I sent it on to Meredith to show to Mailer. We then heard back from Meredith to the effect that Mr. Mailer would be willing to meet with me. Now, mind you, we now had a 2-hour screenplay for a 4-hour miniseries and a tentative dream of regaining the rights to the Deer Park. But I had an invitation by Mailer to come east to meet with him. And I did. I flew, I got in late in the afternoon and met him at the appointed hour at 8 o'clock at his agent's office in Manhattan on a wet, cold night. and entered an office that seemed not to be lit at all until one got to the inner office on the 13th or 14th floor. And there, behind the desk, in his royal tiny honor, sat Norman Mailer with that great leonine head in Scott Meredith's leather chair, holding court. And he was very gracious with me, and I told him that I hoped that he was pleased with what he read, the 2 hours. And he said he liked them very much. And as a matter of fact, he insisted on playing Tepes himself, the studio head in the story, which was about blacklisting and betrayal and God knows what else. It's a phenomenal novel. It's the best novel I've ever read about this industry. In any case, I said, well, since you want to play Tepes and I'm telling you you've got the part, Norman, does that mean we're okay? And he said, well, that means that I'm now happy to read your second 2-hour script. And I said, Norman, for God's sake, I must tell you something. When I told Scott Meredith we had the first 2-hour script, we didn't. I took the month off and wrote it on my own. I got no money for it. I wrote it out of love and passion and the hope that you would like it enough to want to talk about it. He said, I do. I like it. But let's see the second 2-hour script. I said, Norman, as an act of good faith, for Christ's sake, come with me on this. I've shown you the 2 hours. You can... And he said, look, I'm telling you, I'm being an okay guy, but I'm not going to give you the yes, and don't look for it tonight, because you're not going to get it until I see the second 2-hour screenplay. And I said, Norman, why are you such a bastard tonight? And he said, well, and for the first time he smiled and said, I'll tell you the truth. When I optioned the piece to CBS originally and to your company, I was in big trouble financially. You know, I have many alimonies. I was desperate. He said, in the intervening time, Scott Meredith, my dear agent, has set up a terrific new deal for me for a new anthology of 4 of my novels in 1 volume, and I no longer need the dough, so I'm not letting it go for television. I said, you're not being very nice. And he said, well, I am, in fact. He said, I'm going to give you an extra month. You want to do the next script, or 2 months, whatever it takes you, I'll give you the time it takes to write the next script. And I left and never did it. But there you are. I mean, that's the biz. I might have done it, as a matter of fact, if I didn't have other things to do, but I did. I had them to do, but that's the biggest regret I've had, that we never got to make Deer Park. I will say, as an apostrophe to this, years later, when I was producing features, somebody came to me with a screenplay from a producer I knew who was living in London at the time, a man by the name of Elliot Kastner. The screenplay was the screenplay for the Deer Park. It was a 2-hour screenplay for the large screen. It was written by Didion and Dunn, Joan Didion and John Dunn, and it was so good that when I got home, I tore up my copy of the scripts I had done.
Wow.
That's my Mailer story, but that's my story of frustration and the percentage of the work that we do that nobody ever knows about. They know about the races we run, not about the time we stuck in the gate.
Yeah. Is Appointment in Samara?
Appointment in Samara is another similar story, yes. The O'Hara story was also a 4-hour miniseries that Reginald Rose adapted, and we got a script approval from Markel's group when I got the midnight phone call saying, don't shoot, because the head of the network has just read it and realizes there's a suicide in this, and can you get rid of the suicide? You know, get rid of the suicide in Appointment in Samara. That's what the book is about. Anyhow, that's another story of frustration. But
any more heartbreak you want to talk about?
No more heartbreak, because, as you may not have surmised from my attitude, it has been a joyous ride.
Well,
50-odd years, I must tell you, for me.
Yeah. In fact, I wanted to talk a little about just sort of producing here. Is there such a thing as a style that you think you have as a producer? How are you different from other producers? You certainly write more than most producers.
We're all as different as our fingerprints are. I mean, producing can be a business of preoccupying oneself with the casting or with reading source material or with going to premieres. In my case, it's a profound interest in the text, and so my preoccupation has generally been with the writing.
And how do you feel about dealing with, say, acting talent? Is that something you've always cast so well. Was that something?
Well, I mean, you
feel
cast,
some special affinity?
You cast from the, from the available pool of talent, and because I sell as hard as I do, I've hustled many an actor into doing a part. I hope more often than not to their satisfaction.
And there were certainly some actors you went back to time and again, who you seemed to like. I mean, there were a few you had a lot of...
Cassavetes is someone I used as often as I could. Falk, I guess the method actor has generally interested me the most.
Mm-hmm. Is there any advice you would have for an aspiring producer, or is this one of those things you can't
The only
advise?
message, and my final message to any wannabe to this business, is that an unhappy childhood is no handicap to a long career in show business.
Do you feel you've mentored anybody along the way?
Yes, I have, but that's not, mentoring people who work with you take what they can or should from you, and you never know what careers have happened from people who've been new in the business when I met them, but that's as it should be.
And is there any way you would like to be remembered for your career or anything else? In closing?
No, the work has to speak for itself. I can't tell anybody how I want to be remembered. The work is the inventory, and that's the man. I'm prouder of some of it than others.
Yeah. Well, I am questioned out. Well, thank you very much, Dad. It's been nice talking
Thank
to you
you very
again.
much, Scott. It's a pleasure. We'll pick this up at the next Christmas party.
Let's do that.
Okay.